Hi, everyone, and welcome to Class Solutions Dental Education Podcast, the podcast series where we share knowledge and experience to provide value to you and your dental practice. I'm your host, Phil Cole, and I'm with my co-host, Chris Webb. And in today's episode, we're going to be talking about embezzlement in the dental industry and how prevalent it is in that dental community. So we're joined today by David Harris, CEO of Prosperident Embezzlement Experts, who will be sharing his thoughts and his knowledge on this topic. So hello and welcome, David. Tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about, I see that, you became an investigator and stuff. Give us a little history for yourself.
You bet. I'd like to say, Philip, that I got into this business because I had some big business plan. And I saw an opportunity to work with dentists. The truth is a little bit far from that. I was, shall we say, not a high achiever academically. My high school and I parted company in not a good way. Ended up joining the Army because it sounded better than jail, which was kind of my alternative at the time. And anyway, I got there and kind of flourished in a way that maybe nobody foresaw. The Army ended up sending me to college, so I have a master's degree, but no high school diploma, which probably not a lot of people can say. When I finished my Army time, I went to work for a bank. I lasted a few years. I got very frustrated. I was a fraud investigator there, and it just wasn't, the bank just insisted on making the same mistakes over and over. And just to give you the chronology, 1989, I quit my job there. I was sitting at home doing absolutely nothing and bored. And the phone rang, and it was a guy I'd been in high school with in my quick visit there, who is now a dentist. And he said to me, "I think my front desk person is stealing. I have no one else to call."
Okay.
His timing was perfect. I mean, I was so eager for any diversion from thinking about my future. And I said to him, "Perfect. I'll meet you tonight at your practice after work and we'll get to the bottom of it." So I went over to his practice. Now this is 1989 BC, before computers. So he was using that old pegboard system that was kind of the antecedent of practice management software.
Oh, yeah.
So I got there and he shoved a bunch of ledgers and stuff at me. And I said, "No, we're going to go at this a little bit differently. Show me where she works." And he showed me her workspace. And I started going through her drawers, and what I found taped to the bottom of one of them was what we call in the trade her cheat book. A lot of thieves have to write down what they do so they can keep track of what's real and what's not real in the accounts. So I found the cheat book, and from there it all kind of unraveled pretty quickly. It's kind of like one of those blankets made of wool where you pull the thread in the corner, and now you have a ball of yarn sitting in front of you on the floor. That's kind of what this looked like. So
Wow.
there was about 30 or 35,000 sheets stolen, which was big numbers in those days.
Yeah.
And so my friend was not happy that she'd stolen, but happy that I'd found it. He said to me, "Can you come back tomorrow morning, please, to help me fire her, because I don't want to face that one alone." And I had no reason to believe I would be any less bored the next day than I was that day. So I said, "Sure, I'll come back." So we got her fired. My friend promised to buy me dinner that I'll mention I'm still waiting for. And I walked away from this whole experience thinking, well, that was interesting, but I didn't really see a job for myself until 2 weeks later. And what happened 2 weeks later was I had an appointment at my own dentist's office. And I was standing outside the front door and I was about to go in. In fact, I had my hand on the door handle and I looked through the glass in his door, and sitting at his front desk was the same woman I helped fire at the other office 2 weeks earlier.
Oh.
So I said something I won't repeat, and I ran to a payphone because in 1989, cell phones were like the size of a briefcase. You just didn't carry one around with you. And I called the practice and I told my dentist about the time bomb that was ticking away at his front desk. And he asked me in this panicked voice, "What the hell do I do now?" And
Yeah.
about 2 sentences later, he hired me, and that was my first client.
Wow.
So that's how I got started. Now, a lot has changed in the last 34 years. Technology has revolutionized how dental practices function and also how we investigate. One of the big innovations was the ability to move data around over the internet, which enabled us to do investigations remotely. I mean, you know, when way back when you did an investigation, you'd meet the doctor at 6 o'clock at night. They'd hand you the keys to the practice and say, okay, just make sure you're out by 6 a.m. and you'd work all night. You know, that was the way you did investigations. Whereas now, you know, our team, and they're about 20 people, you know, they all work from home. They, you know, they can work kind of daytime hours and do it all across the internet. And my chief technology officer's in the office next door, and he's the one who handles that monumental task of getting data so that we can work with it.
So I guess I question would be that just spurs off right away is, was it easier to embezzle back in the pegboard days, or is it easier now because technology, you can get away with hiding so much?
It is way easier now, and that's a great question. You know, in pegboard, even the least business savvy dentist could have a decent picture of what was going on, you know, and you had little clues, like you could see, you know, whose handwriting made an entry. And of course, embezzlement happened in the pegboard days, but it was relatively small scale. The time when the dollars really started climbing was when practice is computerized. And now what doctors are looking at, instead of transactions, which was kind of what you saw in pegboard, they're looking at reports. And just by their very nature, a report is an abstraction. It's you know, it's an aggregation of transactions. And of course, somebody who produces that report can have a lot of shaping about what the report says. You know, they can set different parameters for generating the report. So embezzlement is much easier, and the dollars are much bigger.
What would you say is the average dollar amount?
The last time we looked, the average amount that a thief stole to the point where they get caught from our files was about $109,000.
When I was looking, and I was looking on your website and doing some research, and one of the things I noticed with that was that the average time span that the embezzlement goes on is 2 years undetected.
Yes.
So that is shocking to me. So if you could just kind of go through, like, why should all doctors be concerned and pay attention, or what things should they be aware of when it comes to embezzlement in their office?
Yeah, that's a question that has kind of a multi-phase answer, Chris, but I'll try and address some of them. You're absolutely right. Embezzlement goes on typically undetected for about 2 years. Why? Because this is like playing poker with somebody, and your cards are face up and their cards are hidden. In other words, if I'm your office manager, I know the control systems. In fact, I am a lot of the control systems. And I know what you look at as a doctor, and more importantly, what you don't. And embezzlement is really a crime of navigating around your scrutiny. So let's start at the beginning. You know, every software produces a day-end report. And it says, here were our fees today, here are our collections, here are our adjustments. Well, one of the basic rules in any business is that the amount collected should be the same as the amount deposited in the bank. And there are two kinds of dentists. There are those who will sit there at the end of the day and, you know, go to their online banking and see if the amounts matched up. And then there's the other 85%. If you're in that 85%, and I am your office manager, stealing is incredibly easy. I don't have to do anything exotic in your software to conceal what I did. All I need to do is divert some of your deposit. So your practice collects $37,200 today. And if I can get away with either depositing, if I'm doing it, or handing the money over to you, if you're making the deposit of, let's say, $800 less than that, and you don't notice that discrepancy, that's what I'm going to do. So unfortunately, there's a huge majority of dentists who are in that category. Why? Because that concept of verifying the day-end collections against the deposit, which used to be a really simple task, has gotten to be a much more complicated one. What complicates it is timing differences. So when I started in this game in 1989, most doctors didn't take credit cards, and there was no such thing as an electronic funds transfer. So the way money came into the practice was either cash or checks, and the doctor, who typically made the deposits in those days, or maybe the doctor's spouse, knew instantly at the end of the day whether today balanced. In other words, I've got X in collections, and it's all sitting here in my hands waiting to go into the bank. Problem now is that when, for example, somebody pays by credit card, first of all, there's a time offset. In other words,
Mhm.
if I pay a payment by credit card today, the practice management software records that as a payment today, but we're having this conversation on a Friday. That money might not get deposited until next Tuesday.
Yeah.
So, the doctor today has no way of really knowing reliably whether that credit card payment showed up at the bank or not. You also have electronic funds transfers, and there the sequence is reversed. They hit the bank first, and then afterward, the doctor's staff recognize and post them. So it's a lot more complicated problem than it was in 1989. And the easiest thing for a lot of doctors to do is just check out of this game and say, you know what, I'm going to trust my office manager and hope for the best.
I had an office manager once that took over somebody that was embezzled. And so she brought up this theory of hers. It sounds like a good idea. But what she said is when she does those day sheets, she wanted to make sure that doctor trusted her and did not think that she was doing anything illegal. So she went around with the day sheets and pulled day sheets from any of the providers and had them sign off on every single thing and verify that work was done, that this was posted properly, blah, blah. Then went into the doctor with the day sheet, said, here's everything, totals up, you have to sign off on it. Because her big thing is if there's ever somebody that does embezzle in this practice, I've got initials for everything that I did, at least, to make sure that it's not coming back on me. I thought it was a good idea. Is that true?
Not foolproof, but a good idea. And to be clear, one of my team said something once that really has stuck with me almost forever. She said, transparency is the first casualty of embezzlement. In other words, if I'm stealing from you, my incentive is to be less transparent as opposed to more. So, I might not want that kind of system. Alternatively, though, Philip, let's assume that a practice is effectively, or that the practice owner is effectively supervising the collections versus deposits. And there are different ways to do that, but let's assume that the office manager is being supervised in that area. I'm the office manager and I still want to steal. The next thing my thought process goes to is, how can I make the practice management software lie about how much money came in? In other words, if my doctor's checking a report against the deposit, how can I make the report wrong? And to be clear, I am not going to get into details here.
Right.
Because my mortal terror is teaching some thief somewhere to be a better thief, and I'm not going to use your show here as a vehicle for that.
Yeah.
But what I will say is, it's tempting to think that practice management software, which is generally made by pretty big companies, is sophisticated and should be hard to fool. It really isn't. If somebody understands how the software works, they almost inevitably can find out how to make it understate collections.
Well,
and
I know that in the time that I've been in, coming up on 25 years of being in dental and calling on as many offices as I did, it's one of those things where the amount of doctors that I had that were embezzled from it, I truly believe that, there's always someone out there smarter, just when you think that you figured it out. And that's why I always tell dentists, when you think you figured it out, there's someone that's become smarter, that's figured out the systems, like you said, some other system. And I kind of feel like it would be something that is, for you guys, has got to be just always changing and always kind of like cybersecurity type, almost like, but there's always somebody out there trying to find a new way to hack the system.
No question about it. Well said. And beyond that, technology is definitely the embezzler's friend. And let me give you a small example. About 7 or 8 years ago, there was this new device that came out called a square. And for the audience who don't know what a square is, it's a little 2-inch by 2-inch white plastic gizmo that plugs into the bottom of a smartphone and turns that smartphone into a credit card terminal. So if I'm a thief, I have 2 problems. I need to get your money in my hands. That's problem number 1. And then problem number 2 is I need to hide what I've done. So steal and conceal, if you like. The the square makes stealing a credit card payment much easier than it used to be. You still have to conceal it in software. I mean, you have to do something to hide what you did, but you know, your starting position is that the patient's payment is in your bank account instead of the doctor's. So yes, our world changes, technology changes what we do, and of course it also changes how thieves steal. And you know, the dollars are getting bigger. As I said, that first embezzlement investigation I did was like $35,000, which was big in those days. I mean, we I won't say routinely, but we frequently see a theft of over $1 million. In fact, on our website, we have part of it, and it sounds like, Chris, you may have had a visit there, called the Hall of Shame. And part of the Hall of Shame is the $1 Million Club. So these are staff who stole more than $1 million from their practice. Now, you know, sometimes that happens in a group practice, but I can think of 3 or 4 instances anyway, where it happened to a solo doctor.
That's just it's mind-boggling to think that you could but like you said, once you get it going and you got a system moving, I'm sure that and the problem I would say a lot of times too is I think dentists fall into the trap of just, if everything's going smooth, the trust factor level is just so much higher than probably most businesses, and it's that family atmosphere with a lot of those offices, so it just becomes so easy. Because I know the ones that embezzled from when I was in the supply business, every one of them sit there and said, I had no idea. She was like, you know, she was like a sister to me, or she was like a family member to me, and I trusted her so much. And it was always that I trusted her so much. So I can see it.
Yeah, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. I mean, if you didn't trust people in the first instance, you probably wouldn't hire them. And if you did choose to hire them, you would probably watch them more carefully. I mean, it's that person, you know, and as soon as the doctor says, I would be, you know, in such trouble if she ever quit. It's, you know, when somebody makes that statement about one of their employees, that's green light to steal. And a lot of times too, the embezzler will kind of worm their way into the doctor's family. A comment I get a lot is something along the lines of, you know, I can't believe it's her. I mean, I was at her daughter's wedding 3 months ago. And it's just starting to occur to the doctor how much of that wedding she actually paid for.
Oh, it's the mass manipulation.
Yeah.
You know, like what you guys had said was one of the things that stuck out to me was, yeah, almost always it was, that's my most trusted person. She was my most trusted, you know, person in the office. And it's that mass manipulation where they have to gain your trust to gain access. Like you said, it's that green light. You gain that trust, and then at that point, it's game on.
It is. And let's face it, I know very few dentists who chose that profession because they had this unquenchable desire to be a business owner. You know, the vast majority of people in dentists are healers and clinicians, and running the business is kind of the unwanted stepchild of the marriage. And when they encounter a take charge office manager who says, doctor, you go in that operatory and you do high-end dental work and you just leave running the business to me. I mean, every dentist who hears that from their office manager thinks that their prayers have just been answered. And sometimes it's true, sometimes it's not.
So when we're doing transitions and stuff, you know, we throw out the stat that it was done by the ADA and other ones. And if you look at just in people in general, 1 out of every 2 dentists will have to retire early or quit dentistry because of disability, okay, or death. But then embezzlement is the same thing. When you look at the ADA, I looked up some, you know, ADA says 2/3 of dentists are embezzled from dentistry IQ put it at a little over 50%. There's others that say 50%. I know, I think you have a couple stats on your website, but they're all in that 50, you know, 40 to 50 percentile and stuff. I mean, it's obviously, I mean, I know yours on your website go back to 2019, and you're going back in years showing the growth actually. what do we do? How do we as a dental community start to get the dentist to understand how prevalent it is? Because it's the same thing for us when it comes to doctors, not getting their practice valuated when they're when they're throughout their career, because it's inevitable. I mean, this year alone, to the end of the year of last year and this year, I would say 50% of our transitions were doctors that had to leave early because of illness or disability. So once again, when we talk to them, they always say, "Oh, that's not going to happen to me." But how do you get these stats out? How do we make this so that people start to recognize that, listen, I mean, if it's not you, then go talk to your buddy when you have lunch with them, because one of you two are getting embezzled from.
Yeah, one of you are going to get embezzled, not necessarily right now. As to how you get the message out, I wish I had a better answer. Things like what we're doing here today are a good start. I speak probably in a typical year 40 to 50 times, and I mentioned before we went live, I'll be at the Michigan Dental Association this year, and I'm speaking in the annual meeting in Grand Rapids, and I'll be speaking about embezzlement in the morning, and then I have a slightly different topic in the afternoon. But I'd welcome your dentist audience to come visit, and we'll open their eyes, or we'll continue that process from where we started today. You asked about numbers, and they're a little elusive, but let me give you the best numbers I have. What is pretty much a consensus is that embezzlement will hit the majority of dentists at some point in their careers. The ADA did a study that probably the most broadly based study that's been done was done by the ADA in 2019. And they asked about 17,000 dentists, have you been stolen from? And the good news first, 53% said, as far as I know, I haven't been. Because, it's a little hard to give absolute answers here. So, of course, the other 47% said yes. And then the ADA asked them another question. And this is where it gets kind of interesting. How many times? And 26% of respondents, in other words, about half those who said yes, said once, as far as I know. You had 11% who had been hit twice, 2% 3 times. And the one that really floors me is that 8% of respondents had been stolen from at least 4 times.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw that. That blew me away.
It blew me away. I mean, I expected most of the other numbers, Chris, but that was the one that really surprised me. So first thing you can do is just a little frequency exercise where you take 26% times 1 and 11% times 2 and 2% times 3 and 8% times, let's assume, just 4. And what you end up with is 86 embezzlements per 100 dentists. So that's what's already happened. Now, there's probably some underreporting. In other words, there's likely some embezzlement that happened and the doctor didn't realize it. There's probably also some embezzlement that happened and the doctor realized it, and for whatever reason, they didn't tell the ADA about it. So there's some underreporting. We can't quantify that. The other thing we can't quantify is how many of the 53% who said no, or for that matter, how many of the 47% who said yes will be embezzled either for the first time or again in the rest of their careers.
Right.
Yeah.
Pretty safe bet that it's going to touch 70 to 75% of the dental population. Now, one more thing I want to throw out just before I leave the discussion of frequency. The ADA asked the same question to dentists in 2007, so 12 years earlier. And in 2007, 35% of dentists had been stolen from. So look what happened over a 12-year period. The prevalence of embezzlement went up by about 1/3. And of course, these are all pre-COVID numbers. We're certainly noticing an increase post-COVID, but it hasn't really been fully studied yet. But just unscientifically, we're seeing more dentists get embezzled now than we did 5 or 8 years ago.
Well, that was one of the questions I was going to ask you too, because that is, I mean, a lot has changed from that COVID in many different directions. So that's interesting. You don't have hard numbers, but you can see that it looks like it's trending even worse.
I'll give you our hard number, which, let's agree is on a small sample size. One thing we have tracked for a long time is called the strike rate. And what the strike rate measures, Philip, is the percent of time that we investigate when we actually find embezzlement. And for a very long time, that strike rate's been very steady at around 70%. Since the start of 2001, it's 78%. Now,
That's nuts.
there could be a lot of factors in that, and I'm a little hesitant to read too much into it, but what it does tell us is that we're finding more embezzlement now than we ever did.
So I've got the, it makes me,
Chris.
it makes me think of like, sorry, I get so excited after reading everything and listening to you, not excited in like oh, this is great, but it blows my mind. And I love what we do in coaching and consulting and working with these dentists. And so I'm passionate to find out information. How can I protect them? Right. So what the two questions I have is like one question or like a request and then like a follow-up with it. So one, would you be willing to take just a couple minutes and share like a story about a doctor that you worked with, kind of how they figured out what was going on and then how you guys came in and helped? And then with that is, what should a doctor or a consultant or a coach do when they have suspicions that are raised? How do they get you introduced and how do you go in and help? What does that process look like?
Great questions. Let's start with a story, and I'm going to tell one that was the subject of a webinar that we did, because we do our own webinars about every quarter. We did one in January of 2023, and we featured an orthodontist from Virginia named Dr. David Hughes. And David's a great guy, very articulate man, obviously a very smart guy. And he got taken for $370,000 by his longtime office manager. Mm. And he was courageous enough to tell the story publicly. We did the investigation actually in relatively recent news. Last week, his embezzler got convicted. Her sentence seems a little light to me, but you can be the judge. She got sentenced to 1 year in prison and was ordered to repay Dr. Hughes $200,000.
Yikes.
And to his credit, David has made it part of his mission to help educate the rest of the dental profession about the perils. And the thing that strikes me about David Hughes, and Chris, you and I talked about this before we went live, you hear him speak and you think to yourself, this is not a willfully blind business owner who, has no involvement whatsoever in the business of his practice. This was a guy who watched stuff, who did all the right things and still got stolen from. So, that's how it can happen. It's a fascinating story. If you're in the audience and you want to find out more, you can just go to our website, which is www.prosperident.com. Our webinars are there, and you can watch the hour and a bit with David Hughes telling his story with some of our team. And we also had a fairly big live audience. I mean, there were about 800 people watching, and they were asking some good questions as well. So it's a fascinating watch if you haven't seen it. And he will give a lot more information than time permits here. You asked Chris how he detected it. He was very typical. The way that most people realize they're being stolen from is what I'm broadly going to call dumb ass luck. In other words, there's some chance occurrence that results in the thief getting outed, and the control systems that doctors put in place and think are protecting them against embezzlement in most cases aren't. For example, a lot of doctors are very surprised when they realize, and David Hughes is one of these people, and he said that the chance that my accountant will spot embezzlement in my practice is microscopic. In other words, they think that their accountant is in their first line of defense, and that's not the case. And you guys know this because of what you do, but it probably hasn't occurred to a lot of the audience. Most embezzlement is concealed inside practice management software. Most accountants don't even need to touch practice management software to do their work. Mm-hmm. So effectively, it puts them right on the sideline instead of in the game. And dentists think, well, this person knows a lot more about money than I do, and surely if embezzlement was happening, they would spot it, and that's not how it works. And as I say, David kind of found that out the hard way. I think back to a big embezzlement I investigated early in my career. It was about $600,000 stolen. And the way it all came to light was the office manager, who had never missed a day of work in anybody's life, broke her leg skiing. And Monday morning, for the first time in anybody's memory, Judy, that was her name, Judy wasn't in the practice. And at about 11 a.m., one of the receptionists came in and interrupted the senior doctor in the practice, which was a big no-no in their culture, and took him out of the operatory and said, "Doctor, I've gotten 3 very strange phone calls this morning. And they're all patients complaining about the same element of their bill." And that's when the receptionist decided she needed to go talk to the doctor. You know, had Judy been there that day, none of that would have happened, because
Yep.
Judy would have gotten those calls and would have steered them away. So that's the way embezzlement is discovered.
That Judy sounds very familiar, because I got 2 dentists that I know that I work with personally, and that's exactly how they got caught. They both went on a vacation, and I think one of them was actually thought that she had the systems locked down so well that she could finally go on vacation, because that's what everybody was surprised. Like this, Judy, for a better name, is going on vacation. What's going on with her? She hasn't gone on vacation in 25 years. And that's what actually happened in that week span. All of a sudden, hell broke loose, and that's how she got caught as well. So,
and to Chris's question about warning signs, exactly. You know, there are 2 kinds of warning signs, and two different activities that should happen in a practice. The first thing that we talked about a few minutes ago was that oversight over the office manager, the reconciliation between what's collected and what's deposited. And my suggestion to doctors is, don't try to do that at the end of each day, because the timing differences involved make it daunting. Do that on a monthly basis, which means that most of those timing issues will self-resolve. The second thing is, you don't have to do that yourself. I mean, there's a dental bookkeeper or somebody who will, for not a lot of money, will do that activity for you. But if you're not lining up collections with deposits, you open the door to the dumbest, laziest thief on the planet. So don't be that guy or that girl. That's the first thing. Again, you can still steal in that environment, but now you have to manipulate practice management software, and that takes a lot more skill and has a lot more risk.
So with embezzlement being so prevalent, do you ever talk to these software companies, practice management software companies? I mean, I never hear any software companies talking about how they're trying to put in checks and balances into their software systems or anything like that. Is that just, it's not worth it, not possible to do, too much of a task and too much money for them to do it, or what?
No, we're actually in fairly regular conversations. In fact, I had an in-depth chat with a practice management software company yesterday, where we were talking about this exact thing. So we share our knowledge with them. You know, sometimes they're a pretty big ship, and turning the ship takes some effort. But frankly, Philip, the problem isn't the software. You know, the problem isn't the tool here, it's the carpenter in most cases. And if you are not doing that square up between what is collected and what's deposited, it doesn't matter what software you use. It doesn't matter what safeguards are in it. You know, that's stealing around the software as opposed to through it. The problem with safeguards in software is there's an inherent trade-off. And the trade-off is between efficiency and safety. So let's talk about something that most doctors are well aware of: adjustments. Mm-hmm. And, you know, conceptually, every adjustment reflects money out of a doctor's pocket, whether that's money to a thief or money to an insurance company or whatever. It's, you know, it's money leaving their pocket. Now, in any software, if you want to, you can set up your software so that the doctor is the only person in the practice who can make adjustments. Unquestionably, that's the safest. It is also an incredible nuisance, because you have staff running to the doctor maybe 30 times a day needing an adjustment authorized. Now, sure, you can say to the staff, okay, there's no such thing as an emergency adjustment. You know, let's batch them all up and I'll do them at 5 o'clock. But now you're forcing a doctor who wants to get out of there and go home to their family to
Yeah.
stay there for an extra 15 minutes, look at these adjustments, make sure I'm happy with them all, and then authorize them. So the safety factors are there in most software. And in a lot of cases, they're degraded by the practice in the name of operational efficiency.
Okay.
So no, I don't think software is to blame for most embezzlement. I think they do what they can, but then you have practices that sometimes knowingly and sometimes unwittingly undercut the stuff that the practice management software company put there for you.
So then let me ask you this. One of the things that we coach is not having an office manager, because a lot of times that person, for other reasons in the team atmosphere and stuff, why we propose that there's maybe a team leader, but not necessarily the quote unquote office manager that's in control of all these certain things, that everybody's kind of cross-trained. Would you say, just because of the reasons we do, I just think to myself, is that something then, because people would be more cross-trained, that you would think that that's something that possibly can eliminate that fraud because more people are handling all the same systems, or it wouldn't make a difference?
I doubt in most practices it's going to make a difference.
That's amazing.
And let's be clear that when there is an office manager and embezzlement happens, probably 90% of that time it is the office manager doing the theft. In the other 10% of the time, the office manager is kind of the co-victim with the doctor. But yeah, they tend to be the people who have that agglomeration of control, sufficient privileges to both pull off the theft and then the concealment that has to happen after. But when you take away the when you take away the title of office manager and jobs are done by other people, I mean, the same work is being done and the same opportunity more or less probably still exists.
But that's gotta show you how sophisticated it is, though, then, that these guys can get, how sophisticated they can get, that even though someone else tomorrow could be doing the same job, they still are sophisticated enough to hide it or whatever. I know I'm not using probably very good terms, but
No, you're
doing something that they're tricking the other ones still with not noticing what's happening.
Well, the first possibility, and let's throw this on the table, is collusive fraud. In other words, you have multiple people involved. And it doesn't matter how you divide up duties. Once people get together and decide collectively that they should steal, that that overrides the fact that I'll be doing this today and somebody else will be doing it tomorrow.
Yeah.
So let's put that on the table. But beyond that, the fact that I don't have this one particular responsibility all the time just becomes an input into my decision process. And, that might mean that I have to work a little bit harder to find the winning formula, but it's probably there. And, most embezzlement, when you get right down to it, isn't all that sophisticated. It's simply that there's a door left wide open in the practice and somebody sees that and throws money through it. What I will talk about, though, in terms of relationship between doctor and staff, is a lot of doctors struggle with the difference between delegation and abdication. And delegation is, I'm giving you a job to do, you're going to have accountability back to me, and I'm going to enforce that accountability. And abdication is, I don't ever want to hear about this again. And I think a lot of times doctors get into the second place, where really the first one is where they should be. And, if that accountability just isn't there, then stuff's going to happen.
With saying that, I think of all the different times that I've I hear that the abdication is definitely something that you hear so many times versus, the prior, because I think a lot of once again, it goes back to the business concept of dentistry, right? They were never taught any business, first of all, but I would say when you talk to them, the majority of dentists don't like it anyway.
No.
So it's kind of funny that they get into a business that they know they got to run a business, but yet they don't really like it in the first place.
Yeah. And if that is you, then the best advice I can give you in that case is accept that and go affiliate with a DFO. I mean, find, or join a large group practice where somebody else is going to run it. If you really hate the business part of dentistry, it's okay to say so. And there are alternative practice situations that suit you. The people I feel sorry for are the ones who really have no interest whatsoever in the business, but they really want to be a practice owner, and they're kind of a round peg stuffing themselves into a square hole.
What, I guess, give me in your professional opinion, is it better to contact you, excuse me, when you have a real suspicion, or is it okay to contact you just to say, you know what, I just want to foolproof my office. So every once in a while, I'm just going to say, hey, David, can you just investigate and make sure that no embezzlement is going on in my practice? I mean, are there advantages to both, or what would you recommend for that?
Both are fine. We actually have two very distinct products that we offer to people. So the first one, which is what we've been largely talking about so far, is investigation. And when we do an investigation in the practice, I'll mention at the top that it is stealthy. In other words, staff have no inkling whatsoever that we're taking a look at things. And I won't get into the details, but I just want to tell the audience, that you don't have to make a public display that you don't trust your staff if you hire us. We kind of come and go in the night, and nobody knows we were there. So investigations are the first things we do. And we get people, Chris, who come to us in 3 different places. I mean, some of them have found embezzlement already, and our job is to map it and ensure that somebody gets prosecuted and all those things. Sometimes people perceive that they're at risk and they want us to confirm it or not. And then we get the people who call us and say, as far as I know, this guy's blue. But I see the statistics and I don't like them, and I just want to make sure that I'm not kind of blithely being stolen from. The other product we have is our proactive product, which actually has that word in the name. It's called Owner Proactive Strategies. And that's where we work with doctors to put the systems in place that will protect them. And if you really want long-term protection, that's how you do it. In other words, almost every embezzlement can be traced back to a system failure. Maybe it was a bad hiring decision made on incomplete information. One thing that will probably shock your audience is that 70 million Americans, in other words, 1 in 4 adults, has a criminal record. And yet the majority of dental practices don't have criminal records check as part of their pre-employment screening. And you're playing Russian roulette there, and sooner or later you're going to hit the chamber with a bullet in it.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of things that people can do to protect themselves, from hiring to security settings and practice management software, which Philip mentioned a minute ago, to what the doctor's oversight process is, which goes back to that stuff I was talking about how to confirm that the right amount of money went into the account, and that entries in practice management software have integrity. Those are all parts of the control system. So we work proactively with people on those things, and it's just like dentistry. If I go to my dentist and I say, I want to spend the least amount of money in my lifetime on my teeth, what should I do? The dentist will probably hand me a toothbrush and a can of dental floss and say, use these every day and see my hygienist twice a year, because the money you spend on those things is a whole lot less, and they're a whole lot less intrusive and painful than what I'm going to do to you if you neglect those things. Mm-hmm. So prevention is the best approach. And we have a whole proactive services department, and its whole mission is to work with doctors on risk reduction.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that would probably be the thing that I would suggest the audience more than anything, is get involved now and not wait until afterwards. I got to think that what is the collection rate, I guess, from an embezzlement? Because I've always heard that, collecting, once you find out that you were embezzled, then the chances of getting a conviction are very slim. Is that true, or is that a myth?
For our cases, it's a myth. Our conviction rate is over 95%, which we're quite proud of. And the problem sometimes people make for themselves is they show up at the police department with a shoebox full of reports from their software, and they say, see, it's in here. And the police can't solve this crime. it is way too technical, and they need somebody like us to do it. On the other hand, when we hand the police our report, which says this person did it, here are the examples, here's how much money they stole, a whole lot easier for the police to work with. So that's why our conviction rate is so high, because we gift wrap it for the police. In fact, a lot of times we skip over the police and we go right to the district attorney. I think what was behind your question though, Phil, is do people get financial recovery? And everybody gets something back. First of all, your clients all have some amount of insurance coverage for this. The norm is 25,000, which is kind of easy money to get back. Beyond that, it depends on how somebody stole and what the thief's ability to repay is. But a lot of our victims are getting restitution checks. So every month they're getting $682 or something. And if somebody took $100,000 from you and you're getting $682 a month, it's a long repayment.
Right.
But I don't know anybody who gets those checks who just throws them in the fire.
No, I mean,
Yeah.
I know with
Well,
the couple that I've had, that's just I don't think the money was as important as they wanted to just see the conviction, right? That they actually
They want to
didn't
see
get
the
away with it.
conviction, and they want to protect the profession, because the other issue here is that and if you don't hold these people's feet to the fire, then they get hired down the street and do it again and again and again. And we've seen one embezzler who I think of was had actually done had victimized probably 15 different practices, and you can point to a whole lot of deficient hiring that's going on there.
Yeah. Wow.
That is amazing. So
Well, I even think about just those proactive services and the benefit of it, looking at the story you just mentioned of Dr. David Hughes and the fact that he was embezzled for $370,000. Yes, she got convicted. Justice was somewhat served there, but what he's getting in restitution is $200,000. He's out $170,000 plus.
Yeah, he is.
So,
yeah, and his comment
so
to
at
us,
that point, you just be proactive and be ahead of it. Don't try to get it back in the end of the game, because it's going to be too late.
his comment, he recorded a comment for us, and he said, you're not going to get all your money back. You're not going to get your sleep back. Just prevent this. Do what has to be done to protect yourself.
Well, David, I want to thank you. I mean, we could go on for hours, I bet, with this, but we got to put a close to this. So I want to thank you very much, and audience, thank David Harris for being with us and talking to us about embezzlement. As you can see, it is a humongous, important topic, and it's something that everyone that's listening should be aware of and should also be looking at. Please reach out to David. Prosperity.com is where you can find them and set up something with them.
I'll just correct that as prosperident.com.
What's that?
Prosperident.com.
Prosperident.com. So reach out, have them talk to you, and find out if hopefully you're not one of those victims. But if you enjoyed our show, please rate, review us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Phil Cole, and we want to thank you for listening.